Hello and welcome to Ben TV. You're watching The Film Whisperers, where two film nerds talk all things movies with a contemporary lens. My name is Saj.
And my name is Matthew.
How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. I mean, this is a different setup than our viewers are you probably used to, but doing as best as I can. How about you?
This is definitely interesting. I don't get to see the fabulous socks in person. I hope you've still, got some fabulous socks on.
I'm not flexible enough to show you, but I definitely have rocked some fun socks today. I've got some purple ones with bananas on them, so I didn't disappoint, and I hope you didn't either.
No. I've got some aeroplanes on mine. How's the world of movies? How are you going?
It's interesting being obviously both of us being here in Melbourne because outside of lockdown, obviously the cinemas are usually open, and so we've been able to see some things. But because so many major blockbuster films have been pushed back, we're only kind of starting to see them trickle in. So I think it'll still be a little while before there's like a big, influx of new, big and exciting movies, maybe more towards the end of the year.
It's good that at least they've left cinemas open during this new wave of restrictions easing. I certainly been to the cinema twice this month, one right before lockdown started and one right after it ended, which is just yesterday, really. So I managed just to watch two different movies, Cruella and In the Heights, both I highly recommend. So it's been better, I guess. The film choices that are hitting the cinemas now, it's nice to see a good set of films come out bit by bit. Let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. So, Matt, I had a thought of talking about sequels.
Yes, it's a good one. Actually, we haven't actually talked about that before on the show.
I'd like to ask you, right? Because there's always this thing with sequels where people always say a sequel is never as good as the original or the first part. Why do you think sequels get made?
I think it's for probably a range of reasons. I'm really cynical, and so oftentimes when there is a sequel produced or made, I think it comes down to money. So, like, if the original film did really, really well and made lots of money and has a big fan base, studios will greenlight a sequel because they know that it's going to have guaranteed income because the fan base of the original will go see it. But it kind of does a disservice to movie fans because, like, as you kind of mentioned before, they're often not that great. So, but I would say a lot of the time it's down to money. I mean, yeah, what are your thoughts?
I would say the same thing. I feel like with sequels, there's two ways of studios approaching it. So some sequels where there's actually a story that needs to be told because it's based off a book. So there'll be five books. The story is already there, and the studios would do one book first. That would be the first part, and then if it's successful, then they would start doing the other books. And because the story is there waiting to be told, that's a good way of doing a sequel. But then there are sequels where they green-lighted after the success of the first film with no intention of a sequel ever being intended to begin with. And then those are the ones that don't do well because it's rushed. The screenwriters that get put on it are probably put on at the last minute. There's no quality. It's just, let's just pump this second one out because people are currently really enjoying the first one. So if we tell people it's going to be a sequel, then they'll buy into it quicker. And then, yes, then that's when it's really terrible. I would say a lot of it is because of the commercial value it brings to studios.
So, Saj, don't leave me in suspense. What are we chatting about first up?
In our usual fashion, we'll start with what's good, what was awful, and then the WTF. So I'm going to throw this one to you to begin with first. So when we say the good, and keeping in mind this is a sequel, in your opinion, what would you rate as your first good sequel?
The first one that comes to mind, and if anyone ever asks me about like a sequel that I really enjoyed, it's always at the top of my list, is actually Sister Act 2. So the 90s film with Whoopi Goldberg. It could be coloured by the fact that I actually watched the sequel before I watched the first one. But when I watched Sister Act 2 when I was a kid, I fell in love with it straight away. I mean, the cast is amazing. I mean, aside from Whoopi Goldberg, there's Lauryn Hill, Jennifer Love Hewitt. It's an amazing cast. The music is awesome, but it's also a really heartwarming story. I think like the first Sister Act, whereas it focused a bit more on, being on the run from the law, The second focuses a bit more on, well, it focuses on this high school music class. And it's a bit more heartwarming. Like, I just think it's a really lovely story and the music's great. And yeah, so that would absolutely be my one. Have you seen it?
Of course, I'm going to completely agree with you. Back in the habit, as they call it, that's how it's
That's
subtitled.
right.
Sister Act, Back in the Habit. I think that was an example of how a sequel worked because they didn't continue really this story about her trying to run away from the law. They actually used that character and said, okay, well, Dolores. Well, what can we do with that character in another setting? And then she moved from the church to a high school. I'm going to completely agree with you. It's really heartwarming. To be honest, I would consider the music of the sequel to be better than the first one because
Agreed.
it did have a lot of hip hop and at the time 90s contemporary musical influences on the songs that they sang. So yeah, I'm gonna completely agree.
Yeah, and I will say just quickly that the critics of that film did the film dirty because on Rotten Tomatoes, I think it has like a 10% rating or something. And I just think this is one of those instances where they got it completely wrong. Like, I just think it's such a fun movie. It's so heartwarming. Everyone should check it out if they haven't already. But Saj, what's your top? Like, what's your favorite sequel? Like, do you think they actually that they got right?
Now I'm going to apologize because the sequel that I'm picking, look, unfortunately, it does have a straight white male lead, and I'm quite ashamed.
Oh, Batman Returns.
Yeah, yeah. So the reason as to why I'm picking this is because this is one of those films where I used to watch quite a bit as a kid. But what really drew me to the film was not the straight white man, it was Michelle Pfeiffer playing Catwoman. And I feel as if she did a job that was just absolutely amazing. She definitely set the standard for Catwoman, and I feel as if every single Catwoman that has been cast since her has had huge shoes to fill.
Haven't seen that iteration. I've seen like Batman and Robin and a couple of the other ones, but in your one, does Michelle Pfeiffer's character have like a kind of gay following? Is it one of those characters that a lot of like that how like often a lot of gay people kind of like just idolize these strong, powerful like female characters? Would you say that she falls under that?
Ooh, I think that's a difficult question to answer because usually with these superhero comic book type movies, the LGBT audience, it's a really difficult connect. I mean, that's just my opinion. The movie in itself, I wouldn't call it camp per se. She plays the villainous character really well, and this is one film where the villains are really well done. Because again, I don't want to talk about Straight White Men, but Danny DeVito plays the other villain as the Penguin, and he does a really good job as well. So I believe because at the time this was the second Batman film, and before that it was Batman where the Joker was the villain, and this was the second movie where it was a live action adaptation of the 60s. So it was a film adaptation of the 60s TV show. So I don't I don't believe the campness of the 60s TV show really flew into this, rather it fed into the films. I don't know, that's just my opinion. So I don't know about Catwoman having a gay following, but I guess her as a character, as in the way Michelle Pfeiffer portrayed Catwoman, and the only comparison being the TV series and probably the comic books before that or during that time, she did an amazing job of bringing that to life.
I haven't actually seen it, but you're making me want to check it out now because I have. There's a few that I haven't seen in the Batman list, so I'm going to add that one to my list. But thank you for chatting with me today about that, Saj, and thank you everyone at home for joining us on the Film Whisperers. You're watching Bent TV.